Hey, what's up? This is a fantasy matchup prediction between Muhammad Ali and Alexander Usyk. So let's get into it. A lot of people are talking about how Alexander Usyk would have fared against Muhammad Ali and against a lot of the other greats of the past after he's basically proven himself to be the number one heavyweight of this era. My initial thoughts when thinking about this matchup is that if we're talking about Ali post exile, so after 1976, when he came back in 71, fought Oscar Benavina, and then went on to fight Joe Frazier, I think Usyk would have beaten that version of Ali. And the reason I think that is because if Ali didn't have his legs, which he didn't have after 71, he couldn't move the way he used to move because he was inactive after 67 and he hadn't trained. And that's another thing about Ali that a lot of people, just going off on a tangent here, is that Ali wasn't dedicated to his craft the way that Usyk and even someone like Floyd Mayweather was. He was an extremely talented athlete. He had great footwork and great hand speed. I'd even go as far as saying I think he's a better athlete than Alexander Usyk. But he was famously once quoted saying that he only trains like 6 to 8 weeks for fights or something like that. I think he only had one 8 week training camp in his whole career. And obviously part of that is because fighters fought a lot more often back then. But also I just don't think Ali, he had a lot going on outside of the ring. I don't think he had the sort of dedication that Floyd Mayweather and Alexander Usyk had. So I would be picking Usyk over a post-prison, post-exile version for sure. I think Ali wouldn't have his legs. And if this is a fight fought at the center of the ring, where they're kind of at mid-range, I think Usyk would beat Ali all day long, twice on a Sunday. And look, I'm a Muhammad Ali fan. My first memory of boxing is Muhammad Ali. So this isn't me being a fanboy or hey, I'm a huge Muhammad Ali fan. That being said, I do think if this fight took place prior to Ali's exile, where he was a lot more energetic, had the ability to move for 15 rounds on his feet. And I mean, you go back and watch some of Ali's fights against Ernie Terrell and Cleveland Williams and Carl Mildenberger. There's no fighter today that I can think of who could have moved the way Ali did so constantly, basically so gracefully around the ring. So I do think that would have been interesting. I think he potentially could have even beaten Usyk. And again, that might ruffle a lot of feathers for Usyk fans. But ultimately, this is a hypothetical matchup. You'll never know the answer. But if you're asking me my opinion, I think a post-exile version, Usyk would have beaten. Because you can't tell me like Usyk and Ali fighting in the center of the ring at mid-range, Ali would beat him. Ali's hands are too low. He's technically not as good. I think Usyk would have been landing more often than Ali was landing on him. And don't get me wrong, Ali had great reflexes, but you got to remember, Ali would have been fighting a southpaw. And that's another point that I want to bring people's attention to, is that there weren't many southpaws back in the 60s, and none of them were even as close as Alexander Usyk. Yeah. Ali was the first heavyweight champion ever to defend his belt against a southpaw in Carl Mildenberger. And he mostly dominated that fight and won by stoppage. But he was getting caught in there, and you were like, and he was getting caught when he stopped moving and he was stationary. Now, if he was doing that with Usyk, he would be getting hit with a lot of shots. A pre-exile version of Ali, I do think would have had a chance, because if you look at even the early rounds against Tyson Fury, and I know Tyson Fury is a lot bigger and a lot longer than Usyk is, but Ali could counterpunch well off the back foot, and he had very fast hands, and that could have given Usyk problems, especially if Ali's constantly moving. A little bit like, and I know people might say, well, Tony Bellew got knocked out, but if you go back and watch those early rounds when Bellew was on the back foot, he was having some success in there. Now, yeah, he ultimately got dominated and stopped, but Bellew is no Muhammad Ali. He's certainly no pre-1967 version of Ali. So whenever these fantasy matchups are out there, there's a lot of sentiment, there's a lot of fanboy stuff going on. That's not what I'm getting at here. I'm just looking at this objectively. I think Usyk would have beaten Ali, but I also think the pre-1967 version of Ali could have beaten Usyk. I think that would have probably been a 60-40, maybe 55-45 fight in favour of Usyk. I think post-exile Ali, no. I think Usyk would have beaten that version, if I'm being completely honest about it. I mean, it's not like a George Foreman situation where you're fighting a big puncher and you've just got to negate that big punch and your legs are gone. But you're not fighting a guy who has maybe the experience, because George Foreman really punched himself out in that fight. And Ali was a lot more bigger and sturdier then, and he was able to use his ring craft and just outwit George Foreman. I don't think he's gonna outwit Alexander Usyk. Certainly not in the second half of his career. The problem though, in the first half of his career, if you look at Ali, he was not really that much of a specimen. If you look at Ali post-exile, yeah, he was a little bit bigger. He was about 220s and stuff. But the pre-version was like down in the 210s, 212. I mean, that would be small relative to Usyk. I mean, when Usyk came in the division, his first weight, to be honest, was 217, to be fair. So we've got to be fair when we're comparing them. So Usyk was a little bit on the smaller side, but he grew into the division. And you could almost say the same thing for Ali. He almost grew into the division after his exile. But another thing is, with modern medicine, you don't know what Muhammad Ali would look like today. Ali would be a completely different fighter. Remember, Ali fought this is crazy. Ali in 1 year, when he fought in the October of 1974 to October of 1975, had 5 fights. All of them he won. And all of them were against top 5 Ring Magazine ranked heavyweights. And these were fights scheduled to go 15 rounds with 6-ounce horsehair gloves. Right? So it's just a different era. It's just, in my opinion, if a fight is 10, 15 years apart, okay, it makes sense. But these are 2 fighters 60 years apart. Ali today would be a completely different fighter. He'd be better. He'd be fighting in gloves that are more protected, and for a fighter with the style of Ali, that would favour him. Yeah, Muhammad Ali got dropped, but people don't know that, or people don't, factor in that they were fighting back then with horsehair gloves. They weren't fighting with foam padded 10-ounce gloves that the heavyweight todays are fighting with. They're fighting with like 6-ounce horsehair gloves. The gloves were like MMA gloves, basically. There was no padding in them, So you got to look at it from both sides. I would have loved to seen a pre-1967 version of Ali with modern sort of, sports conditioning fighting Usyk. I mean, what a fight that would have been. I mean, I wouldn't write off that version of Ali, because even though Usyk's had a lot of success in the heavyweight division, he wouldn't have the same speed advantage over a prime Ali that he had with like Fury and Joshua. I mean, I'm still saying that he would have beaten Ali, not with a great deal of confidence, but I do think he beats a post-prison version of Ali. Yeah, like that version of Ali was very good. He was still a great. I mean, he beat Foreman, Frazier, Norton, Ernie Shavers, but a lot of those guys were big punchers, pressure fighters, didn't have the awkwardness of Usyk, weren't southpaws. But yeah, a sort of exile version of Ali certainly would have had a very good chance of beating Usyk. But yeah, I guess we'll never know. And it's always good to just have these, fantasy matchup talks. I mean, they're purely hypothetical. In terms of who's a greater heavyweight, I think that's Muhammad Ali because of the depth of resume. Now, in a fantasy matchup, you can choose Usyk for sure, right? But in terms of depth of resume, remember Usyk's beaten Joshua, Fury, Dubois, and Chisora at heavyweight. I don't think that surpasses Foreman, Frazier, Liston, Archie Moore even in there for Muhammad Ali, Ken Norton, Ernie Shavers, Jimmy Young, Ernie Terrell. So I think Ali has more depth of resume at heavyweight. Obviously, Usyk did what he did at cruiserweight, and if you factor all of that in, you could. Some people might argue, but I mean, beating George Foreman, who was 25 and Ali was 32, is possibly one of the best wins in boxing. So, legacy-wise, I would say, yeah, Muhammad Ali. In the heavyweight rankings, I'd put him higher, but in a head-to-head comparison, yeah, I don't think it's crazy to pick Muhammad Ali at all. I mean, sorry, to pick Alexander Usyk at all, you know. But yeah, they just fought so far apart that it is a little bit unfair to sort of compare these sort of fights. They're both all-time greats in the best of their respective eras, and you know, if this hypothetical matchup happened, I mean, would have loved to have been ringside for it. I mean, even though it would have cost a fortune. Yeah, so yeah, those are my thoughts on all of this situation. Yeah, I'll be trying to be put out more stuff in this boxing YouTube thing. So yeah, man, if you like it, subscribe, all that good stuff, and I'll catch you guys later.